everyone, and thanks, Matthew, for your talk. I think for a lot of us who are in our 40s, your straitjacket's almost been like the story that we needed to hear, because even as we've moved on in life, there's still a lot of things that we haven't been able to almost accept into our own well-being and things like that. I'm going to make an apology right now because ironically the Alba party are screaming past my front door as we speak at this point in time, and they've done it 3 times so far. So if you do hear them and anything they're going to say, I do apologise in advance of that. So in addition to Matthew, I don't think Matthew needs to introduce himself again. We have 5 lovely panel members, and I'll let them introduce themselves, but they are from all parts of the community and also working academically as well. But as David said, I'm Alistair and I manage the Essex service, and the Essex service is part of Waverley Care, which is a national project for working with gay and bisexual men and men who have sex with men in Scotland. And we have services across all or many of our inequalities. And at the moment, one of the most commonly used services is around substance use. So supporting around continued substance uses, which has been exacerbated during the lockdown. Not just alcohol use, but indeed drugs as well. So, and you can find more about us online. So I'm going to hand over for the panelists to introduce themselves, and I'll start off with Carol, and then after Carol has introduced herself, then Georgios can come in then. Over to you, Carol.
Thanks, Alistair. Hi, everybody, and thanks to David for the invitation to speak today. My name is Professor Carol Emslie, and I lead the Substance Use Research Group at Glasgow Caledonian University. We've been doing research around LGBTQI+ substance use, and we're really proud to be part of the partnership. Thanks.
Hi everyone, and yes, thank you to David for organising and sending us on an invitation as well. My name is Georgios. I am the founder and one of the directors of QuTo Glasgow, which is an upcoming social enterprise looking to run a multi-purpose queer sober venue in the city. We had the unfortunate timing of starting off in a pandemic, so it's still in the making, but you can catch up with us online if you like. We're trying to sort of like maintain momentum on the virtual world while we get our venues in place.
Okay, thanks very much. Mohamed, can you introduce yourself, and then we'll hand over to Chris next.
Hi everyone, my name is Mohamed Sesay. I'm part of the Panellists, a volunteer from the Glasgow and Substance Use Community Champion Project. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Chris. I'm part of the substance misuse campaign as well. I'm also a student at the University of Glasgow studying community development, and I'm kind of really interested in supporting the process to create safer spaces for the LGBTI community.
Okay, and last but not least, Rupert.
Hi everybody, thank you all for coming this evening. I'm also one of the volunteers with the project. And I am doing a master's in social work at Edinburgh Uni and doing a dissertation on cultural competence for LGBT substance use services.
Okay, thanks everyone for introducing yourself. And I guess the first question to put to the panelists is problematic substance use really a bigger issue in the LGBTQI community than the general population? And I guess the second part of this question is, why do we think that? So I suppose, Matthew, if I go to you first, given what you talked about in your opening remarks,
yes, it is. And it's funny, I think there's a quote that I left out from somebody, I think a guy called Ford Hickson. I don't think it ended up in the book, just about how there are studies that show that without sounding too hardcore about it, that we are more likely to engage with borderline criminal activity, and not meaning like we're running around robbing banks, but just when you grow up in a community of people that are criminalized. You know, when I was 17, having a relationship with somebody who was 23, my first boyfriend, he was doing something illegal. We used to sit in his car and hold hands. And every time a car went past, we'd both kind of freak out because, you know, he technically could have gone to prison just for having a consenting adult relationship with me. So when you are constantly feeling like you are that, you know, drugs are it's not such a big deal. You're already doing something that society says is bad and not allowed. And so, you know, I've got straight friends who, you know, lots of them who did do drugs, but lots of them are more kind of reticent about doing it. So yeah, it is a big thing, and it's horrifying sometimes when you see some of the decent, wonderful people. Everyone's decent, but you know what I mean? People that you just think, God, you know, a good friend of mine really completely brought down, ended up homeless because of drugs and alcohol, and it's just very painful. Yeah, really painful. So yes.
And I guess, Chris, do you want to talk from a sort of situation in Scotland, perhaps, around what your experiences are?
Yeah, sure. I think it was certainly after I came out to like my father. It was very a liberating kind of experience for myself, and he was really supportive of me coming out, and he supported my kind of decision to look for a youth group at that point. So I was able to find an LGBT organisation for young people, and I was embedded in that situation, getting to know young people, getting to know people who were from the same experiences of myself, and then in that experience, it was kind of like we were all kind of heading out to the scene and stuff like that. So it's all kind of catered around the scene. We're all kind of heading out for drinks and partying and stuff like that as well. And although I had a kind of good experience in terms of coming out, there was still kind of underlying kind of issues going on there, like in terms of like feeling that kind of shame feeling and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of having had that kind of negative impact as well. And I think other people kind of having that same experience as myself. And yeah, it's kind of just tailored to round about the scene.
And Carol, from an academic point of view, is this coming through in studies? Is it starting to be seen as an LGBTQI inequality, maybe is the best way to put it?
Yeah, I think we've got really good international evidence now that shows that this is an inequality both in alcohol, in heavy drinking, and in illicit drug use as well. It used to be we only had this evidence for men who had sex for men, but we're getting more evidence coming through now about sexual minority women and about trans people too. I think we've got concerns as well during lockdown, of course, about people in the community worrying that the situation would lead to increased substance misuse. And Pink Saltire did a recent survey and found that 22% of respondents had reported drinking more to help them cope with lockdown. So of course, this isn't just a problem in the LGBTQ plus community, it's a problem in wider society. But what we find is during lockdown is that there's a real polarization. So people who are already drinking heavily are tending to drink more heavily. And I think that's being a real concern for people.
Okay, and Rupert, what from your experiences, perhaps maybe, why would you think this is a bigger problem for LGBTQI populations, maybe compared to, I hate using the term mainstream or wider society, but that's what I'm meaning.
I think I can speak to my experience as a trans man who has lived experience with substance use. I think a lot of us can relate to that feeling of after coming out of the closet, of the like euphoria and the relief of being in spaces with other queer people and not feeling like the only gay in the village anymore, so to speak. And we're very encouraged to have a good time and to like really celebrate that, which we absolutely should. But there are no kind of safety measures set up for people if it goes a little bit too far, or the detrimental effects of to put it one way, having too much of a good time. And I think that's one of the pitfalls that we have as a community, is that, of course, we want to be able to celebrate with each other and have fun, and drug and alcohol use, you know, people do it for pleasure purposes primarily, at least at the beginning. And I don't think that we should lose sight of that. But without adequate supports and resources for people, if they feel like their substance use is getting out of hand, or if they're suffering effects that they don't want to, then we have a community of people who think that they are supposed to be doing these things because that's what everyone around them is doing. That's how queer social culture works. It's primarily based in nightlife and bars and clubs and stuff, and aren't even able to identify that there might be an issue going on.
Yeah. Georgios, from your experiences in working with this project, would you say that this is a unique situation to Scotland or the UK, or do you think it's something that is part of our, almost that we are accepting it as part of the way we are as a community?
I mean, I think it's a good question. I think it's where intersectionality comes in, and there's just like so many different things that add to that. I would say, not being from Scotland, I find that, you know, like doubly, I guess, dependent on like alcohol and substances. I mean, finding the community doubly dependent, one, because of the cultural, I guess, like elements of Scotland and the UK, of like predominantly like what, like the way to socialize is, you know, finish work on a Friday, go out, drink, and not even drink, probably go out and get plastered actually, and then get a taxi home at 4 a.m. and spend the weekend with a 2-day hangover. And then also being part of the LGBT community, which very much has internalized that and embedded it as sort of like, you know, the only way to like socialize. There's so much to unpack in terms of like substance misuse and where it comes from, and why we're sort of like so dependent on that, on substances, and I guess like a very narrow definition of what it means to be queer and what it means to celebrate being queer and around other queer people. I mean, Matthew does a fantastic job in Straight Jacket, like explaining a lot of that. I think shame is probably the word that like keeps coming up all the time. Like I read that book, and after that I was like, fuck, I probably need to see a therapist, because I just had not realized how much like internalized shame I had within myself and like within different aspects of myself. And then just looking at the community, I was just baffled that there was nothing, literally nothing else apart from like mainstream bars and clubs that we could socialize as a community, you know, that we could hang out and actually create meaningful relationships. And I think, yeah, I was just getting pissed off at how everyone just expects us to socialize in a very narrow definition, and in a very specific, you know, time. And I think as a community, we probably deserve a bit more diversity than that.
You know, I completely agree. Mohamed, what's your experiences in terms of, I mean, and talk about what you've learned working with this project as well, because I think this project is a really good example actually of what could happen on a national scale around one of the
yeah. I've learned a lot with regards to this project, because like especially Black minority and in the society where I came from is very much challenging. You know, like sometimes when people feel very bored, you know, like the government, the community are stressing people. So it leads to many factors where people with colors that the LGBTQI, they involve themselves in different substance use just to ease stress and other things. And also, yeah, there are lots and lots of challenges with regards to the use of substance, especially like within the Black minority, which I represent. Because like I'm asylum seeker, there are other people that find themselves in such situation, they find it's very absolute challenging, unless sometimes they involve themselves in alcohol. Even I myself before, when I was back home, the only thing that keep me is when I involve myself in taking alcohol. So it's very much challenging within the LGBTQI community.
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah. So I guess moving on to the second question, I'll just throw this out in general to the panel. What do you think? So effectively, there's two parts to this question. What do you think can be done to reduce substance use related harm in the LGBT community? And then I'll come on to the second part in a minute. But if I go with Chris, could you maybe start off, and then the rest of the panelists can come in as we move through?
Yeah, I think for me, through kind of overcoming the barriers that I've faced over the years, it's kind of having spaces where you can kind of redefine who you are, or kind of find that sense of authenticity in terms of finding out who you are and being able to express that through creative kind of means and stuff like that. So it's about having kind of dedicated spaces where you can be free to express yourself in so many ways, rather than going specifically out to the scene to get smashed, as people have said earlier. So it's about kind of having spaces where you can be free to be able to hold yourself and kind of find out more about yourself as a person in a kind of deep and meaningful way.
Does anyone else want to come in here? Matthew, you said something that intrigued me, was when you were a student and you went out in the gay scene, and it was, a lot of it was fun and a lot of it was exciting almost. I think that's something that we could all, or most of us, relate with, apart from the last year and a half, of course. But you know, but what do you think? Why do you think that appealed to us so much?
Well, I think it's like if you've been stuck in. I mean, similar to when we come out of lockdown, isn't it? People are talking about, oh, it's going to be the Roaring '20s, and everyone's going to go, like get really, go mad for socializing, and they were saying that everyone's going to be having casual sex. When you've been suppressed for so long, you really want to break out, don't you? And I had some amazing times. I mean, I feel like a lot of my 20s disappeared into nightclubs, but never felt so good as I did completely drunk or off my head, on the dance floor. That's the truth of it. And I think it was really interesting as well, and I think it's really important to acknowledge as well what Mohamed said. Just when you're stressed, so it's not just the growing up thing. If you are someone who's experiencing racism, or if you're someone who's experiencing homophobia or transphobia, or you've got a horrible neighbor that's being homophobic or transphobic or whatever, or you're scared to walk down the street if you're trans, of course you're going to need to try to bring that anxiety down. And we don't really get told in society, do we, about how to do that, like meditation or sense of community, all these kind of really idealistic things. And these idealistic things do work, but it's so hard, isn't it, to say, what we really need is a transformation of the entire way we live and the way society works, and better counselling. When you talk about mental health in the media now, it's all about, oh, everyone must talk. Well, if you go to your GP to ask to see a therapist, you can have a really long waiting time. It's not really that simple. There are other big structural problems. And I say in Straitjacket about having community centres, I think that's a really important thing, that we could all have places where we can go, where older people can go, where younger people can go, where you might watch films or a play or whatever it would be. But these are things that would cost a lot of money. And it's sad to me that since the book came out, there hasn't been a huge upswing of people in the community who do have lots of money and influence who could maybe try and progress that. That hasn't really happened yet.
And I think that's important. And actually, the money and the sort of support from government, whether that's centrally or local, is a lot stricter. And the funding for initiatives and these kind of things is disappearing as we speak. And I think that's something that we need to always remember as a community. And I think one of the things that's coming back in since lockdown has been some of these people missing the experience of being able to go out and get the support from their peers. And what about the rest of the panel? Has anyone else got anything to add on this?
Thanks, Alistair. Yeah, I would really agree with what's been said so far. Our previous research showed that LGBTQI people felt that they were really invisible to service providers. There's this the assumption that everyone's straight and cisgender, Services are often also perceived to be very macho and intimidating, so aimed at kind of white straight men. So anyone who doesn't fit that box really feels like they don't fit services, and sometimes that's enough to put people back off from even contacting services, let alone actually having an experience with services, which may be good or not good. I'm really excited about Georgios's venture, because I think we need to push back on the assumption that the gay scene is alcohol fueled. You can only have a good time in Scotland, which is already a heavy drinking culture, within the gay scene if you are drinking heavily. So what other ways can we identify ourselves or show that we're having fun without drinking? I think that's really important. And thirdly, I think also looking at a higher structural level, we need to push back against the alcohol industry as well. I mean, the alcohol industry is really interested in increasing their market share, whether it's looking at countries where women don't drink traditionally, or whether it's increasing their market share in the LGBTQ+ community. So we've been trying to call out the marketing at women with our hashtag Don't Pink My Drink campaign. But very, you know, I'm looking for a hashtag for LGBT drinking and alcohol advertising that's directed at the community, because, you know, alcohol companies sponsoring Pride, you know, it's a really, you know, it's quite a strong message for people, particularly those first coming out, that alcohol is really entwined with the community. And I think there's an important pushback on the message that alcohol equals empowerment.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting, you know, our culture and how we've engaged with people for so many years has been associated around alcohol. Pride's a great example of that. More to the sort, to those who are volunteering or have engaged with this project, thinking about intersectionality, how do we reduce barriers to accessing services other than those relating to LGBTQ identity? So how can we break down the barriers, you know, that prevent people going to services and talking about how they feel about their substance use? Who would like to come in first on that one?
I might say a little bit about that. When I was thinking about this question, I kept coming back to like disability rights movements and that kind of moniker of nothing about us without us, which is the name of a couple of really great books and papers about disability rights. And essentially, I think it can be applied to barriers to access for service for anybody who belongs to any kind of protected characteristic, whether it's race, gender identity, disability, is to have people with lived experience of what it is that they are being, or what the service is providing them about. Sorry, that was a mess of a sentence. To involve people with lived experience, if they are the ones experiencing the barriers in the decision-making process for how to remove those barriers, and not having people with, you know, 17 letters after their name making decisions on behalf of communities that they don't belong to. They might be experts in their field, they absolutely are, but these people are experts in their own lives. And so bringing those two things together, I think, is the most effective way to get us where we want to go.
Mohamed, I'd be interested in your perspective on what was said there about how, you know, how can we make accessing services easier for a population that already traditionally finds itself having trouble accessing services?
Yeah, just like what Rupert was saying, you know, as well, even on my own perspective, it's good sometimes, like, at least to create more avenues, and especially like campaigns, like I'm still representing the Black minority, because like they are more vulnerable. Only few, because like as a result of now, other organizations have set up, which at least sometimes bring others, because still others are still maintaining the old issues back home, because like you're just thinking like you being part of this community, you just need to stay within that corner. Wherein at least you find it's very challenging to express your rights as an LGBTQI member or within the community. So like more sensitization, another thing maybe will help more to see how best people can access the services.
I think there's, do you mind if I hop in just and just say, am I on, by the way? Can you hear me? Hello.
We can hear you.
Oh, sorry, my computer's looking a bit strange. Just for a really good friend of mine is a therapist who specializes with gay clients, and mainly gay clients, and some trans clients that he's working with now as well. And I think, and I'm sure, I'm not speaking for Rupert, but I thought it was a great point that Rupert made about people being involved in our own discussions. It's just so important. I mean, the amount of stories you hear from people who, for instance, when we're talking about chemsex, it's not always, kind of palatable, to mainstream therapists. You'd think that therapists would be very open-minded to hear about everything, but it's a lot of gay and bisexual men will need to talk about what's going on for them in terms of chemsex, and maybe having a weekend where there's multiple partners or whatever. And if they're completely terrified or ashamed about, saying that to a therapist who sometimes really do react in a kind of like a horrified kind of way. And I think the piece I just wrote for therapy today there was someone who told me that a therapist had said, I can't work with you if you're using Grindr. That's just, people don't understand the complexities that this community can present with, and I think clearly that's a problem. So it's and what Georgios said is so true about unpacking so much of this. It's so complex, and we're all very different, even amongst the LGBTQ community. We're all very different. Lots of people are very left-wing, some people are right-wing, some people are very heteronormative, some people are not, and all of us need support. And it's so complex about working that out and addressing the needs of everybody. This is a hard one, I have to say.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And sometimes the responsibility for that often falls on us as a community to have to respond, but sometimes we don't necessarily have the opportunity to respond because sometimes the decisions are made without us. So moving on to a third and final question. What role could LGBTQI spaces and commercial venues play in reducing substance use and related harm in our community? Georgios, do you want to kick this one off?
Yeah, happily. So I was just thinking, I was reading the question like in preparation. I was just thinking there, like, one of the stupidest things I said about our community, and there's many stupid things said about our community, but one of the stupidest things coming from homophobes is sort of like, just don't really care what you do in your bedroom, like just keep it away from me kind of thing. And I just feel like our bedrooms are probably like the easiest part of who we are. Like, we're actually, so much more in terms of like how we engage with the world and, the way we interact. I think like LGBTQ spaces are so important, sort of like creating that space to cultivate like our sense of community, our sense of self, our sense of sort of like healing and how we approach that with one another. And it is an absolute shame that like being in Scotland when there's like such a diverse like LGBTQ population, we still actually don't have the spaces to sort of like meet and create relationships and meaningful connections that we're really in need of. The nightlife and the clubbing and all that kind of stuff is part of it, and it actually might have some sort of like healing power within it, but we also just need to have like the day-to-day interactions that we're so lacking, and we can do that in sort of like an accessible way that like represents our entire community, because we're not just gay men, we're trans women and we're Black seekers and we're parents and we wear so many different hats, and it's actually not that complicated. We just really need to be sort of like more honest and proactive about it, and maybe stop waiting from higher authorities to do that for us, because that's not happening. So I think we just need to do it ourselves.
Always it always comes back to us, doesn't it? Doesn't matter. I'm just going to throw that question open to the rest of the panel in the interest of time. Has anyone else got want to add to what Georgios has just said?
Can you just remind me what the question was?
I need to remind myself as well. Hang on a second, I'll get it up. So the question is, what role could the LGBTQI spaces and the commercial venue play in reducing substitution-related harm in our community?
Yeah, in the first place, like we should increase the issue of activism within the community as a LGBTQI space, wherein at least we sensitize other members about the use of substance within the community as well, to see how best they can minimize, because like it's hardly for you to stop someone from having access to more substance, but like minimizing it with time, maybe they will stop. You know, like there are many factors as well to see how best, even the avenues, they too can try to see how best they can help in sensitizing the LGBT community here within the society in order to reduce harm within the community as well.
Could I just add that I think it's another really difficult one, this, because there are some venues I know of, like for instance, GAY in London. I know Jeremy quite well, and he's like religiously anti-drugs, and obviously I guess he would be, because you get your venue shut down, and he's really hardcore about it. They have a zero tolerance. If you even mention that anyone's ever said they've taken drugs in that club, he gets really worked up about it. So there are people that are policing those issues. On the other hand, there are some venues, let's be honest, where the clubs that will run till 3 o'clock the next afternoon, where part of the experience is taking drugs, and everybody knows it. Saying that, there are some of those clubs I know that I think when I was writing Straight Jacket, I would hear that there was a period where the police were raiding the clubs in South London more often than normal, and all the club owners became very, very strict and zero tolerance and all the rest of it. And at that point, it was when people then thought, okay, well, we can't go to drugs, then we'll start having chemsex situations in people's homes. So I do think there's a really important role for venues, and certainly in bars and pubs, that's a slightly different issue from the drugs. With the alcohol, I think we need to be responsible and have responsible ownership and management there. But again, I think it's a wider problem, isn't it? It's just dealing with what is the thing that is driving people to want to spend every weekend completely out of their heads. I think that's probably the bigger issue.
Yeah, and I think certainly from what we do at SX, it's certainly something we see coming along. But what we're seeing right now is actually a longing for that community again, and that community still remains part of the ever shrinking scene. And in Scotland, it's becoming a minuscule scene now. But it's still an important part. So, I don't want everyone to think that, the industry or the gay scene in itself is bad. And, but there's certainly some good practice that needs to happen. And JY is definitely an example of that, actually. Just to conclude, before David comes in and shuts me down, does anyone else have anything to add? Perhaps.
I think I was just going to add a bit about, I think everyone's made really great points about the need for sober queer spaces, but I also think that commercial venues that cater to queer people, so like gay bars, nightclubs, I think that there's a responsibility for them to do a little bit more, because I think those spaces operate as like social hubs for the community in the way that for straight people, maybe their schools or their workplaces operate. And so having harm reduction information or supplies available on posters in the bathroom, doing workshops during the day when there aren't people in there drinking, or, even if there are, and just being a space that is saying, okay, if you're going to do this, let's make sure that we all come together as a big team, as a community, to do it as safely as possible.
Okay, David gave me an extra 3 minutes, so I have stuck to that extra 3 minutes. So it's back to you, David.